Biblical law guides us unerringly in our ethics, in our relationships, in what it is that God requires of us. The requirements of God are eternally laid out for us. We'll never be in any doubt as to the requirements of God. On the other hand, the strategies are not set in concrete. For example, God had a strategy to destroy the power of the Egyptians. He was not only delivering Israel from Egypt, but he was also in a very real way destroying the Egyptian police state. That whole police state structure that had kept Israel under oppression to the Egyptians, and no doubt had brought a strong degree of oppression even concerning the average Egyptian citizen. The scripture doesn't really talk about that, but that has to be the case because there was a police state at work there. And so his strategy involved something broader than what the people of God had been crying out for, which was actually get this yoke off our necks. But they did not know the divine strategy. They didn't have the strategy. They didn't know God was going to take them to the Red Sea, fence them in, whereby there was no way for them to go back. Then he was going to open a way through the Red Sea for them, and he was going to use their way of escape as also the way of destroying the Egyptian police state. And God had told him, the Egyptians you see today, you will see no more forever. We need to understand providence, and we also need strategic insight in this time and season on our watch. God is a deliverer. He was not only delivering his people, he was also giving Egypt a new beginning. So out they go, and now strategically God is taking them into the wilderness, not to take them directly into the promised land. For God to take them into a land that is flowing with milk and honey, they really have to understand the order of God. They've lost sight of so much of the order of God while in their years of slavery, and they've got to recover a full understanding of divine order. God is going to restore their vision and their view of his covenant. God is going to give his law in the form of a written code for the first time. They have his law, but they don't have it in the form of a written code. It always amuses me to hear people talk about before the law as being before Mount Sinai, as if there was ever a time when God did not govern by law. They had the law. We see Moses judging in terms of the laws of God before they got to Mount Sinai. So God is going to give them his law as a written code. Because without a written code, all kinds of people can do all kinds of things. But even though they've got the law, they mess with it so much. Whereas if God now puts it in the form of a written code, and he particularly summarizes it in stone, stone just declares eternal permanency. This is universal. This is absolute. This is the order of God. These are the very ways of God. This is the very wisdom of God. The wisdom of God is contained within his commandments, his statutes, his testaments, his precepts, his ordinances. That's the wisdom of God right there. You have no clue what righteousness is and what unrighteousness is. You have no clue where the boundary line is. You have no clue what the requirements of God are without that law. Now, God's royal law of liberty was written into man's nature to begin with, so man's never been without it, but now God adds it in the form of a written code. Nobody knew that was coming. To them, they just want the yoke broken. But then God sends their deliverer, and God now begins to give them insight that he's going to take them out. And they're going out into the wilderness where they can worship God on God's terms, free of the dictates of that particular police state. And what they're going to do beyond that is they're going to go and possess a land flowing with milk and honey. But still, God did not give them advance notice of this governing order of God that you mess with so easily. God took them to Mount Sinai and gave them, firstly, the 10 Commandments written on 2 tablets of stone. And beyond that, he gave them the full exposition. So here's an entire written code, ultimately, that comes out of what God is doing with them. They go into the promised land with a reset understanding. They go into the promised land with a greater dependency upon the living God. God had to change them from having the mindset of slaves to having the mindset of sons. You can't take a bunch of slaves out of Egypt and have them go and conquest Canaan just like that. They're slaves. You know, they say, well, they're not slaves. They've just been set free. Yeah, physically they've been set free. But in their minds, they still think like slaves. They've been trained how to think like slaves. From the time of Joseph all the way through to the time of the Exodus, they'd been in Egypt for that long. But many of those years in slavery. So here's a bunch of men and women. They come out of slavery. They're free, but they don't know what to do with their freedom yet. They don't know how to keep it. I don't think they were thinking of a return to the old police state of Egypt. They realized the police state was over. That's why they were so keen on going back, because we can go back and be free. Pharaoh and his armies have been drowned. They finished. We can go back and have a better life in Egypt than ever. That was not the order of God. God wanted them to go forward and go into the promised land. In the promised land, they were going to do that until they saw what it was going to cost them. They saw the giants and decided Egypt is going to give us a far greater new beginning right now. In other words, what do they want? They want a way of life that does not involve the call of godly dominion. Canaan requires of them godly dominion. It requires of them to act like sons of God, and they didn't like the idea of doing that. They did not understand that liberty is a product of faithfulness to God's covenant. Its rewards are life. And all of that is reset for them. They have a vision laid before them of life under God, life in terms of God's covenant. This is what we have to understand, and that is the yoke is broken from off our necks because of the grace of God, and the grace of God restores our love of His covenant. God's people love the grace of that covenant that God has supplied through Jesus Christ. Anytime people think that they can have freedom without the covenant, they are absolutely deluded, because only the covenant brings man into true liberty. Liberty refers to man's freedom under the covenant. That's liberty. Freedom outside of the covenant is bondage, even though men are determined that they will have a covenant-free life of freedom. If you want to be covenant-free, you can't be free. That's a good saying. If you want to be covenant-free, you cannot be free.